Hello everyone. We are going to study the circulatory system in human beings. So let me start by saying that human beings have a very well developed and specialized system of transport of nutrients, gases and the hormones produced by different glands within the body. And this system is called the circulatory system. So the circulatory system, what does it do? It transports gases, it transports nutrients, it transports the hormones within the body to all the parts of the body. So it is basically circulatory system does the work of, it's a transport system which transports gases, nutrients and enzymes. So we have different parts in the circulatory system, and these parts are, or rather it comprises of blood, it comprises of blood vessels, and it comprises of the last, very important, a pumping machine of the body which pumps the blood called the heart. So there are three units of the circulatory system. Number one, blood, the blood vessels, and the pumping machine, the heart. So let me talk about the blood first. Blood is the fluid connective tissue. It is the fluid connective tissue. So it circulates all over the body, transporting enzymes, food, the nutrients and different gases that we need in the body. So it is composed of plasma and blood cells. There are two types of blood cells. Okay, basically two types of blood cells. First is red blood cells and the other white blood cells. Red blood cells, erythrocytes, and white blood cells, leukocytes. And we have blood platelets, which is known as thrombocytes. Now what does the red blood cells do? The red blood cells is red because of the presence of hemoglobin. What does the hemoglobin do? It carries oxygen. It carries oxygen to different parts of the body. Okay, from the heart to different parts of the body. Wherever the body needs oxygen, it transports the oxygen. And what about the white blood cells? White blood cells are the, let's say, the guards of the body. It protects us from harmful germs and bacteria or whatever that enters and causes diseases. So the red blood cells are red in color because, as I already told you, because of the presence of the protein called hemoglobin. White blood cells are larger than the RBCs and do not contain hemoglobin. Therefore, they are colorless. That's why we call it white blood cells or leukocytes. Now, we have the third are the blood platelets. The blood platelets are colorless. They are disc shaped and it does not contain nucleus. The red blood cells also do not contain nucleus, and leukocytes do not contain, or the blood platelets also do not contain nucleus. Now, since the blood contains three types of cells, red blood cells, white blood cells and the leukocytes or the blood platelets. Now this has to travel in our body through vessels, and these vessels are called blood vessels. In general, it is called blood vessels. Now, there are three types of blood vessels. Okay? Now, let me name it: the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. Okay? I repeat it. There are three types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, and the blood capillaries. So, What is an artery now? An artery is one of the blood vessels which carries, please remember, which carries the blood away from the heart. Artery is the blood vessel which takes the blood, which carries the blood away from the heart, whereas the veins brings the blood to the heart. The arteries have thick walls because the blood taken away from the heart, because arteries carry the blood away from the heart, and the blood has pressure in it. So to withstand the pressure, the arteries, the wall of the arteries are thick, whereas the walls of the veins are thin. Are you getting my point? So what does the capillary do now? The capillaries are very fine blood vessels that connects the arteries with the veins. So capillaries are very, very tiny tiny blood vessels which connect the arteries and the veins. So this is all about the blood and the blood vessels. Now we talk about the main pumping machine, which is known as the heart. Okay, it is a pear-shaped organ, as big as your fist, and it is located in the chest cavity, slightly tilted towards the left. Okay, and the walls of the heart has special muscles which work tirelessly, and in your entire life, even before the birth of the child till the human is dead, it works continuously 24/7, and it is which has the heart, which has a muscle which is known as the very special cardiac muscle. It is an involuntary muscle, so it works continuously, contracting and relaxing the heart all the time. Now, since it contains the muscles called, you know very well, the cardiac muscles, the involuntary muscles, now the heart is enclosed by a double layer membrane called pericardium. It is known as pericardium. Now, double layer. What is in between the two layers of the pericardium? We have pericardial fluid. We have a pericardial fluid between the two layers of the walls of the heart, which is known as pericardium. We have pericardial fluid, and what is the function of the pericardial fluid? It absorbs any shock and jerks during contraction. So it acts as a cushion to the heart. It absorbs all the shock and jerks when the heart contracts and relaxes. Now we come to the internal organs of the heart, the internal structure of the heart, not the organ, internal parts of the heart. Heart has 4 chambers. What do we have? The heart has 4 chambers. The right auricle, the left auricle, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. Okay, I repeat it. The heart has 4 chambers. The auricles, the top ones are called the auricles, and the lower ones are called the ventricles. And the left side of the heart and the right side of the heart is separated by a wall called septum. So this wall is called the septum, which separates the heart into 2 parts, the left and the right. The auricles are separated from each other by interauricular septum. So this is the interauricular septum, and this is the interventricular septum. So this is the wall of the heart which separates the 2 sides of the heart, the left and the right, which is known as the septum. In the auricles are separated by intraauricular septum, and the ventricles are separated by interventricular septum. So now we have the different parts of the heart now. Here, very, very simply, I've done it. This is the auricle. I told you the top layer, the top chambers of the heart. There are two top chambers, the right auricle and the left auricle. We have the lower chambers, right ventricle and the left ventricle. And remember that I've drawn it like this. The walls of the left ventricle and the right ventricle are thick. We have a reason, because from the left ventricles and the right ventricles, the blood are pumped, it squeezes, and the blood goes up from both the cases by the arteries. Because the arteries, you know, I told you earlier, arteries takes the blood away from the heart. A for artery, that's how I remembered when I was in school. I used to get confused between artery and the veins. Who takes the blood away from the heart? So I remembered this way. A for artery, A for away. So artery takes the blood away from the heart and ventricles take the blood to the heart. Or we can write it like this also. A and V. From the heart. It takes the blood away from the heart and ventricles bring the blood back to the heart. That way also you can remember. Anyways, so as I was saying, the walls of the ventricles are thick. Why? Because it pumps the blood away from the heart. Okay? And the walls of the auricles are thin because they are the receiving chambers. They just receive the blood. Okay? They just receive the blood. The auricles just receives the blood, whereas the ventricles pump the blood away from the heart. That's why the walls of the ventricles are thick. And of course, we can see the lines here. These are not the lines, these are the valves. This is the tricuspid valve between the right auricle and the right ventricle. And between the left auricle and the left ventricle, we have bicuspid valve. This is bicuspid valve and this is the tricuspid valve. Okay, like we have it here in detail. So anyway, so now what happens is, let me tell you, the blood, this is the blood vessel that brings the blood to the heart now. This is the superior vena cava. This is the superior vena cava and this is the inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava brings the blood from the anterior part of the heart, that means top portion of the heart, whereas the inferior vena cava brings the impure blood from the lower portions of the body. Once more, the superior vena cava, the entire thing is called this vena cava. The top one is known as the superior vena cava, which brings the blood from the anterior portion of the body, whereas the inferior vena cava brings the blood from posterior portion of the body. Now, the blood, the deoxygenated blood, we call it. Deoxygenated blood means impure blood, which has very little oxygen and more of carbon dioxide. Now, it enters the right auricle. It enters the right auricle. Okay? The impure blood or the deoxygenated blood enters the right auricle from the vena cava, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, and it enters the right auricle. Now the auricle, as I told you, it just receives the blood. The right auricle will receive the deoxygenated blood. Now what happens is it passes through the tricuspid valve and comes to the right ventricle. Okay, once more. The superior vena cava and inferior vena cava collects the deoxygenated blood and brings it to the right auricle. Right auricle just receives the deoxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood passes from the right auricle to the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve. Now, why do we have a valve here? Now, what does the valve do? Let me tell you. Valves just prevents the backflow of the blood. Any valve for that matter, it does not allow the blood to flow backwards. Okay? Now what happens is, now when the right ventricle receives the blood, the right ventricle will squeeze. The right ventricle will squeeze. Now what happens is, the deoxygenated blood which has come from the right auricle to the left ventricle now passes to the pulmonary artery. This is called the pulmonary artery. Okay, this is the pulmonary artery now here. This is the pulmonary artery. So it passes from the blood, passes from the right ventricle to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Again has valves which controls the backflow of the blood. So when the blood squeezes, this valve over here, this valve will close. Okay, this valve will close, and when it is pushed, the blood pushes up, this valve over here will open and the blood will flow to the lungs. So when it relaxes, this will open. Okay, tricuspid valve will open and the blood will full flow, whereas this will close and the blood will not flow backwards. Now what happens in the lungs? The blood from the heart, now from the right ventricle, goes to the lungs. Now what happens in the lungs is there is exchange of gases. Which gases? Lungs. Carbon dioxide is given to the lungs and the lungs give us oxygen. I mean, the oxygen dissolves in the hemoglobin of the red blood cells. That means the blood, whatever blood that now pass out from the lungs contains oxygen, which is known as oxygenated blood. Now there is the lungs will take in the carbon dioxide from the blood and the lungs will give oxygen to the blood and the blood becomes oxygenated. It's full of oxygen. Over here, as the blood entered the right auricle and the left ventricle, the blood was full of carbon dioxide. Okay, deoxygenated blood we call it. Now it goes to the lungs. Now exchange of gases takes place in the lungs. That is a different chapter altogether. In the lungs, oxygen is given to the blood and the lungs will take away carbon dioxide from the blood, purifies the blood, and then the oxygenated blood passes from the pulmonary vein that brings the blood back to the heart. Is it okay? I told you, artery, the pulmonary artery takes the deoxygenated blood away from the heart to the lungs, and from the lungs it comes to the left auricle via pulmonary vein, because veins bring blood back to the heart. So remember, pulmonary artery is the only artery which carries deoxygenated blood, and pulmonary vein is the only vein in the body which carry oxygenated blood. This is very, very important that you have to remember. Now, the oxygenated blood from the lungs via pulmonary vein comes and it is received by the left auricle. As I already told you, auricle, what is the function of the auricles? Auricles only receive the blood. Right auricle receives the blood, the deoxygenated blood from the Vena Cava, whereas left auricle receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs via pulmonary vein. Now, the blood has to come down to left ventricle. Now, from the left auricle, it comes down to the left ventricle via bicuspid valve. We have a valve here which is known as bicuspid valve. Is it okay? Now, the bicuspid valve, again, it passes through. Now, it will collect, the left ventricle will collect the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle. The left auricle. Now, as the blood is collected in the left ventricle, it now pumps the blood. It squeezes. The blood gets squeezed and the oxygenated blood passes from the left ventricle via, this is the largest artery known as aorta. This is the largest artery which is known as aorta. So the aorta takes the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle now to different parts of the body. The blood which is passing through the aorta and the pulmonary vein, it is oxygenated blood. So from the left ventricle, the blood will pass through the aorta, through this valve, and distributed to different parts of the body. Are you getting my point? Good. So let me talk about the auricles, the ventricles, and the valves, the bicuspid, tricuspid, pulmonary, aortic valves from the book. Okay, I will teach you from the book, as I've already told you just now, in brief. Now, there are 4 chambers of the heart: the auricles and the ventricles. So the receiving chamber is the auricles are the receiving chamber. So they receive the blood. Auricles receive the blood. The right auricle receives the blood from the vena cava, whereas the left auricle receives the blood from the lungs through pulmonary vein. Now, what does the ventricles do now? As I already told you, the ventricles will pump the blood away from the heart. The right ventricle pumps the blood to the lungs, whereas the left ventricle pumps the blood to different parts of the body via the largest artery called the aorta. Now we come to the valves. I already told you there is a valve between the auricle and the ventricle, which is known as tricuspid valve, whereas the valve in between the left auricle and the left ventricle is known as bicuspid valve. That is there. Now we call it pulmonary valve. The valve over here in the pulmonary artery is known as pulmonary valve. Is it okay? It is known as pulmonary valve. Now, the aortic valve. We have a valve in the aorta. We have a valve in the aorta. What is the function of the valve? The valve prevents the backflow of the blood. The valves prevent the backflow of the blood. So therefore, this valve over here is known in the aorta is known as aortic valve. Whereas the valve in the pulmonary artery is called pulmonary valve. Is it okay? Good. Now, heart's natural pacemaker. Now, what does it do? Pacemaker, what is it? A cluster of cells situated on the upper part of the right auricle. Upper part of the right auricle, somewhere here. There are cluster of cells in the upper part of the right auricle, somewhere here. Upper part of the right auricle. We have cluster of cells, and it is known as sinoarterial node or SA node. We call it sinoarterial node or SA node. It coordinates the heartbeat by generating electrical impulse, and it is called heart's natural pacemaker. That's why we call it. So what is sinoarterial node? The sinoarterial node is a group of cells which is found on the upper side of the right auricle. Upper side of the right auricle. What is its function? It generates the electrical impulse. It generates the electrical impulse, and it is known as heart's natural pacemaker. Is it okay? Now, the blood vessels. We talk about the blood vessels now, okay? The blood vessels of the heart. The vena cava, as I already told you. The vena cava. The superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava collects the blood from the anterior portion of the body, whereas inferior vena cava collects the blood from the posterior part of the body. Next we have are the coronary arteries and the veins. The coronary is something to do with the heart now here. There are 2 major coronary arteries. They supply oxygenated blood to the heart. Now the heart also needs oxygenated blood for it to function. Okay. So because it is pumping the blood all the time, it needs a lot of energy. It needs a lot of energy, and oxygen oxidizes the food and gives the energy to the heart. So heart also needs the blood supply. And which blood vessels will supply the blood to the heart, oxygenated blood to the heart? These are called the coronary arteries and the coronary veins. So coronary artery brings the blood, oxygenated blood to the heart muscles or to the heart, the entire heart, and the coronary veins take the blood back to the right auricle. Deoxygenated blood right back to the right auricle. Is it okay? So these are called the coronary arteries and the coronary vein. So what does the coronary arteries and coronary vein do? It supplies the blood to the entire heart, Good. Now aorta, as I already told you, it is the largest artery. It is the largest artery. So it is the main artery, and it arises from the left ventricle, and it carries oxygenated blood from the left ventricle to all the different parts of the body. Now the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary artery here and the pulmonary vein. So connected to the lungs, the heart and the lungs. It connects, the pulmonary artery and the vein connects the heart and the lungs. Please remember that. The artery which takes the pulmonary artery is the artery which takes the blood, deoxygenated blood, from the right ventricle to the lungs. And the pulmonary vein brings the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left auricle. So that's it about the aorta, pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. So once more, I want to tell you how the blood circulates in the heart. Okay. Now the superior, as you can see, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. All right. The blood is brought from the superior vena cava, from the anterior portion of the body. The inferior vena cava brings the blood from the lower portion, posterior portion of the body, and through this it enters the right auricle. Now this is the tricuspid valve. As you can see, the white ones, these are the tricuspid valves. The blood enters from the right auricle to the right ventricle via tricuspid valve. Now it receives the blood. Now it has to pump the blood. Now it will go pulmonary artery, takes the blood to the lungs. The pulmonary artery, you can see, it takes the blood to the lungs. So from here, from the left auricle, these are the valves you can see, pulmonary valves. So the blood from the ventricle now passes through the pulmonary artery and goes to the lungs. And from the lungs, it comes again, the oxygenated blood passes through the pulmonary vein. These are the pulmonary veins, and then comes to the, it is received by the left auricle. It is received by the left auricle. Now we have the bicuspid valve here. Here is the tricuspid valve, here is the bicuspid valve. So through the bicuspid valve, it passes to the left auricle. Okay, sorry, left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, the blood, there is a articular valve. So through the valve, it passes. This is the aorta. This is the largest artery in your body, which is known as aorta. So aorta will carry the blood to different parts of the body. So now we talk about the double blood circulation. The double blood circulation. Now, what is double circulation? For completing one round of circulation in the body, the blood passes twice through the heart. From here, it goes to the lungs, and from the lungs again comes to the heart, and then the heart pumps the blood away. So, 2 times. The blood enters the heart 2 times. One from the vena cava and one from the lungs. So, this is known as double circulation. And it consists of pulmonary circulation. So what is pulmonary circulation? The circulation of the blood between the heart and the lungs. I repeat it. The circulation of the blood between the heart and the lungs, between the heart and the lungs. This is known as pulmonary circulation. And systemic circulation is the circulation of the blood between the heart and other parts of the body. So from the heart, the aorta takes the blood to all the different parts of the body. This is known as systemic circulation. That's why we have 2 types of circulation. That's why we call it double circulation of the blood. The pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. The pulmonary circulation means the circulation of the blood from the heart to the lungs, and the systemic circulation means the circulation of the blood from the heart to different parts of the body. Okay, so I want to repeat it once more, the circulation of the blood in the heart. So as I told you, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava will bring the blood to the right auricle, and from the right auricle is via the tricuspid valve, it goes to the right ventricle. Now the heart will squeeze, it will pump, and then the heart is pumped to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, the deoxygenated blood, and there is exchange of gases in the lungs. The lungs take in the carbon dioxide from the blood, and the oxygen is given to the blood in the lungs, and now the blood flows from the lungs to the heart, to the left auricle of the heart via the pulmonary vein, the only vein which carry oxygenated blood in the body. Now it passes the blood from the auricle, it passes through the left ventricle through the bicuspid valve. Now what does the valve do? As I already told you, it will prevent the backflow of the blood. And from the left ventricle, the oxygenated body will be transported to different parts of the body through the aorta, and which has a valve called aortic valve. Now what is the functions of the valve again? For the last time I'm telling you, the valves prevents the backflow of the blood. So this valve over here does not allow the blood to flow backwards. Okay, since there is pressure in the blood, because it is always pumping, the left ventricle is always pumping the blood up to different parts of the body. So therefore, and this oxygenated blood is carried by the arteries. That is why the arteries have thick walls to withstand the blood pressure. So I'll show you a small image here. You can have a look at how the heart beats. There, the heart beats. The ventricles are pumping. Can you see? Yeah, the ventricles are pumping over here. It is getting squeezed, so it opens. You can see when the ventricle squeeze, the aorta will open. So we can have a look for the last time. Yeah, you can see the heart beating. These are the valves. Okay, I'm a little bit late. These are the valves. You can see the valves here. Okay, the tricuspid this side and the bicuspid on the other. Okay, this is the aorta. Thank you, sir. We can have a next one. Yeah, there the valves are opening and closing over here. So thank you, children. This much for today. We will continue in the next class. Thank you so much.